Speaker for this session is Andrade from Peru, famous Western astrologer, and her lecture topic is El Nino Costero.
Namaste. Good morning, everybody. I will talk about a phenomenon that occurred in Peru last summer. It's called the Nino Costero, which means the coastal Nino phenomenon. Okay, I will explain about the phenomenon very quickly, and then I will explain about the asteroids that I use for this presentation, and then finally some lessons of what I obtained for this experience. The typical Nino phenomenon, I want to start saying that a Nino phenomenon is not a natural disaster. It is a natural phenomenon that leads to disaster, which is another story. So the country and every part of the world that have any phenomenon has to be prepared for these circumstances. What happens in the Pacific Ocean is a typical oscillation between the warm waters and the cold waters. Sometimes it goes to Australia, and sometimes the warm water goes to Peru, and in this balance can happen between 7 years or a difference of 5 years. But lately we have observed that the phenomenon changes much more often than we had expected. So in a typical Nino phenomenon, warm water goes one way, then goes to another way. And we have a differentiation also because the name El Niño, which means child in English, it is because the phenomenon occurs in December, near December, and it lasts until March generally. So the name is given because of the Christmas time. But in this oscillation, there is a variation in which is called La Niña, which means little girl. Child means little boy or child, a male child, and La Niña means a female child. What happens is when the warm waters go away from the Peruvian coast, then the cold water comes to the Pacific Ocean and it affects the Peruvian coast, and it's called La Niña. But when the warm water comes in the Peruvian coast, it is called El Niño. But the topic I will talk today is about a particular Nino phenomenon, which is the coastal Nino, or El Nino Costero, in which in the Peruvian coast we have two currents, warm waters and cold water as well. So if you can see in the map, in the shorelines there is a blue arrow, which is the cold water, and the red one is the warm water. Sometimes the cold water buffers the current of the warmer one, and we have a balance. But sometimes it can be predicted. We have some opportunities to see beforehand if the phenomenon will occur or not. But with the coastal Nino, practically the cold water disappears and all the warm water covers the whole coast of Peru. In this particular case, the Nino Costero affected only the southern part of the equatorial coast and mostly of the Peruvian coast. So in the Nino Costero, we didn't have the chance to make some predictions about it. It suddenly appeared and affected all the coast of Peru. This is the map of Peru. The red area is what the Nino Costero affected, from the top practically to the middle part of Peru. And it was about December until March, but its peak was in March. This is what happened to our country in certain areas. The flood practically destroyed most of the streets and most of the bridges. You can see these people crossing, they are crossing a street. They are not crossing a river. They are crossing a simple street. So the flood became with a huge intensity, full of mudslide and full of other things. We didn't have the opportunity to react and help our Peruvian people. some bridges collapsed. No, some no, many bridges collapsed. So we have less opportunity to distribute our donation and our helps. So the Air Force was crucial in the disaster relief and the distribution of donations. But during this time, we had a chance to witness a mudslide very close to Lima, and we were witnessing some cows going until the ocean, etc., and we were witnessing other things, and suddenly we see on TV a woman coming up from in the middle of the mudslide after being dragged for 8 minutes, swallowing mudslide, and we didn't notice about this woman. When the TV was broadcasting what happening in Lima, we saw this woman coming up, and she looked like a dark goddess. She looked as somebody that came up from death to be reborn. She was able to stood up and get out by herself, and in few meters from her there was a cow, which is important for this topic. I will explain why. And so she had the opportunity to survive. She was dragged by 8 minutes swallowing mudslide. Fortunately, she survived and her family is fine. But her name is Evangelina. When we noticed that the name of Evangelina, the first thing that I figured out is about Sagittarius. So it called my attention why this is happening, because I experienced this previous phenomenon of a Niño before, but this one was so unexpected and so full of rage of the nature that I observed that something else beyond the typical planets must have been happening, and I discovered what happened. I decided for my investigation to use asteroids. By the way, I anticipate that I will talk about asteroids as if they were planets, so you will hear some asteroid doing a square or making opposition as any other typical planet. And I wanted to use asteroids because they give me a further information, sometimes detail of daily life within a long-term cycle. And I decided to use 2 packs or 2 sets of asteroids, the mythical ones and the literal ones. The mythical ones, I decided to use the dark goddesses, 3 of them. I mean, 2 of them are asteroids, and I added Lilith because it's the Southern Rage. For the literal asteroids, I chose those that can describe what was happening. So for this case, I used the Asteroid Peru, the name of the country, Oceana, Area, Child, Flood, and Rain, trying to figure out where they were placed and to explain what was happening in the chart of Peru. And I added Chiron because it's the wounded healer, but our country has, and any country has its own wounds. So for the selection of dark goddesses was Hecate, Nemesis, and Lilith. Chiron, as I mentioned, is the ills of our society, the recurrent wound that comes from time to time of our country. And these asteroids, Peru, Area, Oceana, Rain, Flood, and Child, as signifiers of the event. This is a little grid, I won't stop here, just to mention that these asteroids are located between Mars and Jupiter, so their orbital period of year can be between 3 or 5 years. Okay, here is the chart of Peru. I will show some charts very quickly because I will go back to another slide that have the same chart. This is the chart of Peru. Peru is Leo. The sun is in Leo. The moon is in the latest degree of Cancer, and the ascendant is Libra. We can see here in the chart the asteroids that are casted there. Oceana is very close to the ruler of the ascendant. We can see Hecate and Ray together, Flood in the 4th house, and the asteroid Peru in Sagittarius. When I figured out that the asteroid Peru in the chart of Peru was in Sagittarius, I suspected that something about Evangelina Chamorro, the woman that appeared, has to do with it, and I was right. This is the chart of our president, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. We call it PPK as acronym. It's very common to use to talk about him. And I decided to use this chart as well because a president is a leader, is not only a leader of a political system, it's also a leader of our collective psyche. So it is important to track what happened with him as well. And this is the inauguration because this phenomenon, the Nino Costero, occurred 9 months after the new presidential term. So everything that he mentioned in his talk, in his presidential measure, has to be stopped somehow to help people in this phenomenon. So here's the chronology. We have the Aries Ingress, then the inauguration, the Libra Ingress, then a full moon that occurred, and the central day. I call the central day that March 15, in which the women appear, because that day it was very intense for all Peruvians. We thought that the country would disappear because at the same time there were many problems around the country. So here it is. If you can see the Aries Ingress of Aries, there is a lot of planets, asteroids, in the 4th house. But if you can see what is circle in the green ellipses, or green circle, sorry, you can see Chiron and South Node together in 21 of Pisces. And pay attention to that degree because it will be repeating afterwards. And Hecate and Peru together. Hecate and Peru together. Mars and rain practically in conjunction, as if announcing that it will be a heavy rainy season. The official inauguration, the day that the president takes the leadership of the nation, he receives in the same day of the National Day of Peru, but the moon was in the latest degree of Taurus. But the moon was not only by herself, she was surrounded by Hecate in one hand and Peru, Astrology Peru in the other one hand, in opposition to Mars. But that Mars is also the nemesis of the Aries Ingress and also the Asteroid Peru of the president. And this opposition makes a T-square with Mercury, and Mercury is the focal point, but coincidentally, Mercury is the asteroid Oceana of the country. So what I'm saying here is that beyond the planets, there can be further information in which we can figure out what will happen. At least for this event, I have more information, further information with certain detail of asteroids. I forgot to say, I mentioned that this 21st degree of Pisces will be important. As you can see, the asteroid Child takes the same place of Chiron as of Node of the Aries Ingress. In the Libra Ingress is much more relaxed, the chart, but somehow Nemesis and Lilith were together, Mars and Ocean in conjunction, and again, Neptune, Child, and Node together, and Chiron as well. So it is like saying that the phenomenon would stay there, won't disappear at all. The full moon previously, 3 days previously to that event when the woman came up, we have the conjunctions of asteroids with planets, which really called my attention because Nemesis was along with Pluto, float with Lilith together, practically over the asteroid Peru of the Peruvian chart, and the rest of the planets in orange. And Hecate, by the way, it took the place of the moon of the inauguration. So it is like, it was announcing a kind of explosion of the population, and we really experienced that. The day that this woman appeared and we felt that the world was going to be destroyed, at least in Peru, we observed this combination. The midheaven is practically, again, the 21st degree of Pisces, which is the South Node and Chiron of the Aries Ingress, and then Nemesis in exact conjunction with Pluto, Lilith in exact degree of the asteroid Peru, along with Float, And, well, area is important in this chart because the Air Force was crucial, very important to help people around our country. And Hecate in this chart is practically the moon of the inauguration, but at the same time is opposed to the Hecate of the president. So here we have this woman and this cow, and the same color as the goddesses. Practically, you can see that reality is very similar to the mythology. You can see that this woman is practically Nemesis in Sagittarius. Her name is Evangelina, coincidentally. We have Hecate in Taurus, well, the woman with Taurus again, and Nemesis in Capricorn. And remember that the moon of the inauguration is moon in Taurus. It seems like the materialization of that moon in Taurus. You have the moon and you have the Taurus over there. This is a chart of Peru with the transits of, on the chart of Peru, of that transit, yes. You can see in the connections that they have. So somehow the transits shaped all the chart, but not only the planets, also the asteroids. What you can see in the left side of this slide are the list of parallels or contraparallels that I found. I won't stop in them, but just only list them. And the last 2-3 lines are referred to the declination of those planets or asteroids, those that are out of bounds or zero declination. But somehow, in some way, they provide me a lot of information, maybe too much to explain now, but they are there just in case. You can, you will check, for example, in this inauguration, that Oceana is in a huge declination, high declination, and it enacted and hit all the president's chart as well, and inauguration. And this is here, what is written in black are the transits between planets and asteroids, mostly planets and asteroids, or between asteroids, and what is written in blue is what really happened. My observation was that Hecate, as soon as leaves Taurus and gets in contact with area, I had the sensation that it would be an accident in the Air Force, and I really pray Hecate to say, please stop it, don't bring us more complications. But that day, an airplane landed and it suddenly became into burst without no explanation. And then we have a contact of the asteroid of Oceana with other asteroids, and we had problems with the Pacific Ocean, not necessarily related with the Nino phenomenon, but the Pacific Ocean started to have anomalous wave, so it led us to close 81 ports along the Peruvian coast out of 103 ports that the country has. So during that year, we had to face not only the Nino Costero, but also the anomalous wave of the Pacific Ocean, but also the possibility of an earthquake. We are expecting an earthquake all the time. And there were a lot of problems with fire as well, the water supply. So we've been checked in this particular period of time very, very sharply. When the phenomenon ended, I continue observing the behavior of those asteroids and planets, and what I observed is that in September, Mars, Mercury, and asteroid Peru were together and very close to the south node of the country. And I say, oh, something will happen here, but the Nino phenomenon is over, so what will be? Well, that day, 14th of September of 2017, I was awakened by 18 tremors during that day. There were 3 tremors. The first one started at 5 a.m. and it ended only until midnight. So we had another experience, and so somehow, in some way, this asteroid helped me to track daily things. So what are the lenses that I obtain for everything? When I want to explore a little bit about a country and what will happen, I like the interconnectedness between the chart of the country, the chart of the president, and the chart of inauguration period, the official inauguration. And they provide me contacts not only between planets, but also with asteroids. And I get more information with asteroids than with planets. The lesson two, I really enjoyed working with dark goddesses. Could be another asteroid, set of asteroids, but somehow in some way I was able to track them and fill this grid with all the transits and aspects that I could find. The literal asteroid as well. And I believe in them because it were 45 years ago we have another Nino phenomenon, and we found contacts with asteroids and transits. Because it was 35 years ago with another phenomenon, El Nino, and it really worked as well. Because 20 years ago there was another Nino phenomenon, and still I can find contacts between asteroids and planets. Another lesson is the declination of asteroids. They tend to be very high out of bound. It's natural to have them. But sometimes there are existing parallels or contraparallels that may take 1 year or maybe half a year, and the asteroids can join those parallels or contraparallels. So what I'm saying is that it is possible to track certain short-term cycles within a larger one. Chiron. Chiron is another lesson. Chiron has in its own way to behave, but somehow in some way it is present in certain circumstances of the country. The lesson 6 is about the nodal axis of the country as well, not only by the fact that the nodal axis has contact with planets, but I also said that with asteroids, this axis tends to be very sensitive to certain circumstances in the territory of the country. And the last one is that the moon of inauguration, because that's the moon that will rule the whole term of presidential term. When I observed that the moon was in that particular degree of Taurus, but along with Peru and Hecate, was not a coincidence. It's part of a T-square that is not an easy one. But my sensation is that this materialization is so obvious that we have the moon in Taurus, expression of artist people that express the support to our country in the middle of this chaos. We have the moon in Taurus in expression of love about the country and to be resistant and persevere our efforts to be together. We receive expression of love in the food. Every donation has message of love for all people that have been displaced by this natural phenomenon. We rescue our pets. Every life was worth in Peru. Expressions about the moon in Taurus is population, please do resist. Population, do continue being together. And we receive expressions of artists that want us to help us to receive and to be strong, that more than ever, to continue living our daily lives. And finally, an expression of love as well in a flower parade. It was drawn the story of Evangelina Chamorro, that woman that came from the mudslide, who was very close to die. Finally, she survived. She has another life practically, but this is she is like a dark goddess as well. It's a moment of birth, death, and renewal. Birth, death, and rebirth. So how she became an icon of this phenomenon. It is not usual to have a personage or an icon to express a phenomenon, but with her, we had that experience. Mm-hmm. So my conclusion is that, besides what is written there, is that the use of the asteroids helped me to define certain circumstances that I cannot see it only with planets. I don't mean to replace them, but it's an additional information. It is a magnifier. But I think that beyond astrology, my biggest learning was to understand that the country is a goddess in itself. And we need to respect her time, her cycles, her behavior. At the end, we all need Mother Nature, but Mother Nature doesn't need us. Thank you so much. Bahut dhanyavad.